Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast, where host Dr. Kirby Rosplock speaks with experts on many topics relevant in the ultra-high net worth family wealth management space. Kirby is author of several books, including The Complete Family Office Handbook, and shares her expertise consulting with families and family offices. Kirby is also the founder of Tamarind Learning, an online wealth education platform that develops practical, foundational learning programs for beneficiaries to help them prepare for responsible stewardship of wealth.
Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast. My name is Dr. Kirby Rosplock, and I'm the host. And today I'm thrilled to have Katie Spencer with us. And we're going to be talking about a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart, which is the topic of legacy. Now, Katie's spent a lot of her career focused on this topic, and I'm going to let her tell you a bit more about her practice and how she came to this work. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Kirby. I'm happy to be here. And so I'm Dr. Katie Spencer, and I have a practice called Northbound Consulting. I focus a lot on family dynamics, coaching and facilitation, and helping families identify and articulate their legacy as a critical part of that family dynamics process. I came to this work through my own personal experience as a G5, G6 family member, generations 5, generation 6. On both sides of my family, we started working with a consultant doing family dynamics work and immediately felt the impact of having that support, having intentional conversations, and really getting clear on what legacy is and means in our lives, how it's a thread across generations, and what it means individually. I also happened to be at that time doing my training in clinical psychology. And so I've woven into my work that experience in human behavior and facilitation of groups with this personal journey that I will always be on and navigating within my multi-generational family system with my husband and with my kids. So it's a little bit about me and how I came to this place.
Well, I love that it's so deeply personal for you. And I find that when we work from something that we're committed and passionate about, but then also we have experienced ourselves, there's that authenticity to a legacy conversation that is so moving, can be so powerful. I know you mentioned that sometimes your take on legacy isn't a traditional or conventional approach. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you think about legacy, what this legacy journey kind of looks like, and how this can be transformational.
Yeah, so like I said, my mom brought somebody in to work with our family, and what she's really been an inspiration for me in what I do professionally, how I bring this all into my personal life, and how I think about concepts that we talk about within this space, such as legacy. The biggest thing that my mom, one of the most important things she's given me, is the encouragement and the emphasis on legacy being mine. Legacy
Mm.
to me, legacy is what you want to be remembered for. It's what you will be remembered for, depending on how you live your life. That will determine the legacy you leave behind. And for me, the most important part about legacy and family systems is to acknowledge where's the piece of that is multi-generational and there's something to be honored from generations that came before. But most importantly, that to me only goes well if every individual in the family system is seen, heard, appreciated, encouraged to come out with what they want their individual legacy to be. And that has always been my mom's message to us, my dad's as well. How do you want to be remembered in your life? And that comes as number one priority long before any conversation about what I hear in this space a lot is stewarding legacy, stewardship of somebody else's legacy, which
Mm.
is an important piece of the conversation. But to me, that's the cherry on top of the sundae. And if you don't have a really amazing sundae in front of you, a self defined legacy, stewardship of someone else's legacy is going to erode family relationships and well-being. So I don't know if that's an entirely different spin, but I think I do emphasize different things first.
And when do you find that individuals are ready to sort of think of their personal legacy versus a legacy that they might have inherited or are expected to steward?
At the core, yesterday. I think
Yesterday.
everybody is longing for someone or a moment in their lives where they're really encouraged to look inward and self-define what they want their footprint to be. How do they want their kids or their partner or their friends or their colleagues to remember them? And I think most people in the world, not just in the space that we're working within and talking about, aren't given that space. No one's asking that question. And I think within this space, we're often asking about how are we supporting somebody or like honoring or stewarding somebody else's legacy that could be 5, 6 generations ago, right? And the emphasis ends up landing there and staying there at the cost, I think, of um, what ultimately contributes to both individual well-being and success within a family.
Powerful. So help me also sort of think about the tension for a multi-generational family that might have lots of different important and interesting storylines as part of this sort of multi-generational side of the family. And then thinking about that now generation who's sort of on the precipice of like where am I going next and what's important. Talk to me about how you see that tension play out and how you support that cultivation of the me legacy, right?
Well, I think the key word there is tension. And I see this conversation contributing to a lot of tension and a lot of unfulfillment. One story that pops into my mind, and we can go more into what does it look like in a multi-generational family as opposed to is it different with a G1 family, but the family I'm thinking about it was a first generation wealth creator and then adult family members in their 30s and 40s, adult children in their 30s and 40s. And the question of how do we engage them in this family business, it often starts somewhere in a family business, engage them and help them steward this, grow it, keep it going. They want to become a multi-generational family of wealth
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
impact and influence. And so that's always that question that I get is how do we engage them? How do we hook them in? And my process is, well, with an enormous step back.
Yeah.
Because and what we did within that family system and how I approach it with a lot of families is communication skills, kind of all these foundational building blocks, but really pulling out and getting to know each individual as though for the first time. What are their
Mm.
individual values? What are their individual, not just strengths, but gifts? What are they put on this earth to do? What do they want their legacy to be? And give them the breathing room and then the facilitated guided space around that conversation to hear each other. And it's amazing, even the generation one family member, there's new things coming out that their kids never would have heard that have nothing to do with the family business, right? And then hearing, so there's one son in this family system who, is the big question mark around is he ever going to get his stuff together and get engaged and hook in and steward this story. Turns out he really wanted to be a fly fishing guide on a boat in Florida. And this was the first time he'd had a chance to really say that and light up. And then we got to hear the other family members say, wow, like I just saw a whole different level of energy in this conversation. And of course, there's a little bit of like, oh, how's that going to go? By the end of that year, he was doing this. He had had the support and the conversation with his family. He was successfully employed pursuing his dream, his own legacy. That's that part of that conversation. And I don't always guarantee this as a result, but he had more space then to say like, and here are the areas of the family business that actually are intriguing to me. Like we invest in different properties and different activities, and like actually boats might be able to be part of this conversation. So he was able to start engaging in what was kind of his dad's and part of his dad's legacy, and kind of in that stewardship category, or as a stakeholder, I like to say, from his own place of empowerment. And this is what's actually of interest to me. And it's coming as this additional component in my life, not like my life itself.
Mm.
So I hope that kind of it paints the picture of how I like to approach that work within a family and have that conversation.
That's so fascinating. And I can imagine that there's this powerful dynamic when we are looking at parents and children, especially as they're more mature and sort of coming to their own individuation and thinking about where they fit in this bigger puzzle,
Yeah.
about really digging into their legacy, not just the parent's legacy.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe go back to this multi-generational legacy conversation and dig into us more about how you see that tension or that opportunity. I always think that sometimes tension is really just shifted the other way, and it's an opportunity to unlock or transform or help families move that are stuck. Maybe we can dig in a little bit more there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anytime, whether it's tension or conflict, conflict to me, not Brene Brown, Tarbrock says that
Mm.
conflict is basically multiple people coming at something with a strategy to address unmet needs, which to me is like, well, that's ripe with opportunity. There's unmet needs here. There's strategy involved. How can we at least shed light on those things and shift it towards growth within a family system? So I totally agree that it is an opportunity. Um, well, I guess one thing I was thinking earlier, that one of the differences between that G1 family I was talking about and what you can see tension wise or opportunity wise in a family like mine, where it's 5, 6 generations, or even we're talking like 3 generations, it starts getting a lot more complicated. The grooves are in more deeply, and you can have multiple generations of people who haven't identified their own legacy, and they're really focused on, and this is, you know, um, simplifying a complicated conversation, obviously, in my response here, even. Um, but the grooves are deep, and there's multiple generations who have been stepping into shoes. And what I see that maybe they weren't meant to fill. Sometimes it can be a process of pounding a square peg into a round hole. And that is happening across generations. And so that the expectation or the bar gets more ingrained within the family system. And I think that that can add an element of it's harder to break out of it. I think in that G1 family I was just talking about, this is new to them. So when somebody like me comes in and says, have you thought about it this way? Are you willing to approach it this way? There's a little more flexibility and openness. So it can be a little harder, I think, to rock the boat, or to
Mhm.
to introduce that there's this path we've been on for multiple generations, and there's this frontage road over here, and there's this other trail right here. Like, are you willing to look at it? Can um, be a little harder. The reins can be held on to a bit more tightly in terms of relinquishing what it looks like in terms of passing down roles, expectations across families, even because we did it this way. So it needs to carry on. My grandmother did it this way, and so it needs to carry on. Just the grooves are a bit deeper, but at the same time, when we shift that into the opportunity, there's also people are ready for change. We've been seeing it done this way for many generations, and new generation is coming up with new ideas, and so there can also be a readiness for change that I also see. And yeah, and I think too, honoring the piece. One piece I see as helpful for regardless of how many generations wealth has been in the picture is when you do honor the legacy of the older generations, there is more likelihood to release some of the control. So when we don't honor it, then I think the reins are gripped onto more tightly.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful statement because that recognition and validation and respect, um, shown in the form of honoring, is also um, kind of giving permission maybe to let go, right? So
Exactly.
I think there's so much that goes into legacy that can be extraordinarily healing and help with those very tense moments of, but I can't let go, or I don't want to let go, or I'm not done yet. And at the same time, I think part of shifting, what I love about conversation we're having is shifting that legacy to the now generation helps reinforce that it's okay. Like we can focus on the future and not continually look in the rearview mirror, and we can focus on what we're co-creating that's next. That gives you permission or gives you comfort that you don't have to hold on so tightly, right? And fear what's coming. Tell me a little bit more about the legacy letters and legacy books that you create. I'm just fascinated by that.
Yeah, well, and actually, the family I was talking about earlier is a nice example too of the dad also. You could feel the sense of relief just when his story was heard. And to see, this was a classic kind of father son dynamic that I've been weaving throughout this conversation. The son hearing, this didn't just start out of nowhere. He was, collecting scraps of metal from a rail yard as a teenager. He was so entrepreneurial and he had so many failures along the way. And the opportunity to share that story, it's like, he was able to kind of be like, okay, at least my kids really get it. They know how hard I worked and where these resources came from, combined with the son feeling permission to live his own legacy in addition to like, oh, well, there are pieces of this that are interesting. Like both, it needed to, the conversation needed to happen for both. And the legacy letters and the legacy books are a way to just art to capture that story in a way that's engaging, in a way that hooks you in, whether you want to be, there are family members who don't want to be involved at all in kind of the stewardship conversation. And that's often because they have no idea what it even is, right? And if they do, it's written or produced in a way that's really not all that interesting. It can be really boring to read some of these stories. I've inherited some myself where I haven't even gotten through it yet. Um, but story and hearing, the origin story, the lessons learned, the failures and how you pull yourself back up after failing, those things are really important. And so, um, to me, there's a spectrum of ways you can document what the story is. And the legacy letter, or I believe you call it legacy or a letter of intent, there's different ways I think to describe a document, and it can have different levels of depth to it. For me, I really like to have families think document that their individual values, their family values, if they're there, if they've done that work, which is a whole separate conversation. I feel really strongly that family values need to be built on individual values so everyone can see themselves reflected in it. Lessons learned, intentions for resources. Like if there are expectations for how resources are going to be used or expectations for involvement in, the legacy, um, making that explicit in these letters, hopes and dreams for your children, for future generations. It's an opportunity to give words and story to what historically can all sometimes just be passed down in estate planning documents, and that's it. And those are the most boring ones to receive. There's very little story involved. And so it's painting out the picture, it's bringing humanity and humor and authenticity into the conversation around resources, whether it's whether a business is involved or not. And I think a legacy letter falls somewhere in this middle of the spectrum. I encourage families, if you can just put bullets down, that's better than nothing. Just make sure it's given to everybody, so you're adding clarity. And then all the way down to, or up to our legacy books, which can really build out, a huge story, pictures, archival documents, all those things. And then others do documentary films, which I think are incredibly powerful and just add a lot more meaning to what, as Jay Hughes and others have written about, wealth can be a meteor or a gift. And oftentimes inheritance lands as a meteor because we aren't having these conversations around it and supplementing it, I think, with these types of documentation that paint out the story is really transformative in that inheritance process.
Certainly, it's also transformative in the stages of grief, right? So, how many people lose significant figures in their family and they realize they just wish, right? They just captured, that last toast at the Christmas or, birthday
Yes.
party or, that last, toast that they gave at a wedding or something. There's just that Christmas card or whatever it is. And I feel like another component of this is actually helping get closure, and just the power of legacy as a way to bring closure to epic chapters and stories of families that go on, more than one generation, or even if it's a first generation founder, just to really memorialize and capture the impact, right, that typically many of these individuals have that shapes our own, back to our own legacy, right?
Yeah, it helps with closure. It helps with transitions of leadership. And I don't know anybody. I mean, I guess there could be a very dysfunctional family where this isn't the case, but I think 99.9% of the time, do you wish say your father dies, do you wish he'd left a little bit more money, or that you had those words? That you really knew some of his important life lessons and stories. And more often than not, that's the most cherished form of inheritance by far.
Well, Dr. Katie, you have shared so many great insights. If there were one or two more thoughts to close out our podcast today, what would you want to leave listeners, viewers around legacy?
I think I always will land on, anytime we're thinking about legacy, think about it, yours is the most important. And if you're thinking about the wellness of your children, wealth and resources landing as a gift for your children, I encourage you to be thinking about how to help them define and live out the life they want to be remembered for. And the best way to do that for anybody is to go inward and think about, what do you want? If you were to die tomorrow, what do you want to be remembered for, first and foremost? What do you hope people would say about you? And then get really, really honest. And that's the hard work with, what would they say about you right now? And there's always a gap. There's always a gap. So then this means nothing. Legacy means nothing if we don't take action, because actions are what define our legacy. So identify what the actions are to bridge that gap for yourself, and then rinse and repeat over and over and over again. I can do this exercise today, define actions, try to fill in that gap to the best of my ability. I guarantee you a few months from now, I need to do it again. And to do that for yourself, so you're living what the life, that you want to be remembered for, and help your kids do the same. And then you can talk about honoring the legacies of those that came before.
Fantastic words of wisdom. Dr. Katie Spencer with us from Northbound Consulting. Thank you so much for being our treasured guest today on the Tamarind Learning Podcast.